Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. Welcome to the fourth episode of Pull Up a Chair, a series dedicated to holding space for conversations about broader themes and topics related to food and people. My name is Chris Rodriguez, and today we will be discussing culinary culture and mental health with Chef Nephi Craig. During today's conversation, we will be welcoming back Chef Craig to share his journey through mental health, sobriety, and recovery. Chef Craig recently stated to me that the pandemic has presented a strike while the iron is hot opportunity to abandon old toxic culinary culture and practices and build new work environments that promote work life balance, self care, and nutritional recovery. We will do our best to lay out a broad scope that will zoom in and out on these themes while allowing time for you, our audience, to engage us with questions and comments toward the latter part of our discussion. Before I continue with our introductions, I would like to offer my sincerest gratitude for the entire Ruby team and their critical work going into this platform. Pull up a chair. I'd also like to share a little bit about me, and also we're having a little bit of a delay getting Nephi on. So in the case that he doesn't join in right away, I'll go ahead and get our conversation started into the topic, and hopefully we'll have him jump on as soon as he can. In the meantime, I would like to share that I grew up in Los Angeles, in between Los Angeles and Baja California, with ancestral roots in the Iberian Peninsula and across central Mexico. I'm a descendant of classically trained chefs and about 20-year veteran of modern French kitchen brigades. I have a bachelor's of arts in gender, ethnic, and multicultural studies, and a bachelor of science in hospitality management from California State Polytechnic University in Pomona. And I'd like to share a little bit about Chef Craig. Chef Craig has 24 years of culinary experience in America and around the world, in London, Germany, Brazil, and Japan. Nephi is an enrolled member of the White Mountain Apache tribe and is half Navajo. Chef Craig is also the founder of the Native American Culinary Association, or NACA, and an organization network that is dedicated to the research, refinement, and development of Native American cuisine. Chef Craig provides training, workshops, and lecture sessions on Native American cuisine for health to schools, restaurants, universities, treatment centers, behavioral health agencies, and tribal entities from across America and abroad. Chef Craig served as executive chef of the Sunrise Park Resort Hotel. During Chef Craig's 9-year tenure at Sunrise Park Resort, Craig and his White Mountain Apache culinary team achieved many national and international benchmarks in establishing a culture of indigenous food across North America. So it looks like we're getting Nephi on in just a few minutes. While he gets going, I would like to open up our discussion today referencing some recent articles that have kind of created a lot of attention on something that is not very new in the culinary world, and that is the intensity, to put it lightly, of the culinary kitchen environments across the U.S., across the world. Um, these articles, the most recent titled "Fine Dining Faces Its Starkest Truths in Copenhagen" by the Financial Times, outlines and documents the working conditions of apprentices and cooks in some of the world's finest restaurants today. And I would just like to note that although this article has gained a lot of attention and opened up a lot of eyes to what's happening in kitchens. I would like to stress that this is nothing new, and in terms of journalistic coverage, uh, there's, or actually just coverage in general, there's a book by Saru Jayaraman uh, titled "Behind the Kitchen Door," and this came out in, I believe, 2013. And this book documents also the working conditions in kitchens in the U.S. From the perspective of migrant, people of color, LGBTQ, and women. So it outlines the different issues that face gender, race, citizenship in the working class in kitchens. And so this work has been done before. We have known about, and also from personal experience, that Nephi and I will be sharing collectively. We have about 40 years of experience to kind of reflect on and go back. So we have a lot to share and reflect on. And we just wanted to kind of frame our discussion today with past and current documentation of what's been going on, and really we want to also go into the history of the culinary culture of modern kitchens, and kind of dig into how how do we come to this point of working of these working conditions, and that have been normalized for so long. And so that is sort of the outline. Also, this event on the Ruby's website, there's an event page, and at the bottom of the page, you can find a link to a document that has these links to these articles and some media, other references that we'll be touching on in our discussion today, that will be available for you to download and have access during our conversation and afterwards. Okay, in just a few seconds while we get Nephi plugged in here. Also, I would like to say that Nephi was featured in Gather, the film, which won an award this year from the James Beard Foundation. And it covers different chefs from across the US, native chefs and food workers. And his actual restaurant that just opened this year, Cafe Gojo, was in the developmental stages during the making of this film. And now they're in full swing operation, which is where Nephi is taking his some time for us today to talk with us. And so I want to say give much thanks to Nephi for giving us his time to join us today. All right, welcome, chef.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
So I just kind of laid out an introduction and went into um, mentioning about your work, about how we've been collectively, between you and I, have about 40 years experience to touch on culinary culture, how it's been for us working in kitchens. Also, we can. I mentioned about the Financial Times article that we've been reflecting on, that just came out last week, and also some more historical references about the roots, the history of modern culinary kitchen brigades. How is it that we came to where we're at today? Why are we talking about this? But first, if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit about yourself. um, how did you get into um, how did you get into cooking, and how did you gain this critical perspective of culinary culture and mental health? And again, thank you for taking time to join us today.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you all, those that are in attendance and those that have taken the time to be with us today. My apologies for being a few minutes behind, but we're here in full production in Cafe Gaujon. My name is Nephi Craig. I've been cooking professionally about 24 years. It's a journey that I could not have scripted or anticipated some of the obstacles and challenges I've been able to encounter. I think what has shaped and molded my perspective on some of the themes we'll talk about today is really just lived experience. I've been fortunate to get some solid training in my youth as a younger chef, and my basic desire to do something with my ancestral foodways from the White Mountain Apache tribe and from the Navajo Nation. You see, I grew up on both reservations in Arizona and part of New Mexico, and being around food, it was just natural. Some of my families would grow corn, so my grandfather grew a garden, and it was just to supplement the table because we grew up in poverty. We grew up poor, and you just kind of grew up thinking that it was normal to grow and share food and to cook and to celebrate it in a cultural way. I don't think I realized that when I entered into culinary school, um, I had a supplemental anthropological culinary education as a member of the BIPOC community, as an indigenous person. I had grown up with food, with a being exposed to my parents' paradigm on food, my grandparents and other elders, and just tribal members. How we perceive food was very, very different from what I was being taught in school. So early on in school, I would ask my culinary instructors, as a young 18-year-old impressionable kid that was curious about professional cooking, I'd ask, "Hey chef, is there such thing as a Native American cuisine?" And here I am, this 18-year-old kid looking for validation. Here I grew up around native foods and the language and the culture, and I was met with a response like, "Well, I know you cook fry bread. I know your people boil a lot of stews." And that, to me, the tone or the messaging I got from that encounter was very dismissive. And when I asked the chef, I was like, "Do you like fry bread, or do you like some of the foods?" He just kind of shook his head and made a cringing face. He's like, "Nah." He's like, and so to me, that irritated me. I didn't say anything. I just kind of I got the message loud and clear. And so, but that became kind of a seed. It became a seed. Like, why is it that way? So I just decided that I'm going to stick with this long enough, and I'm going to be go on the journey to learn how to do something with native food someday. And so, along the journey, it's I think, looking back over the course of 24 years, the one of the most important, powerful things that I've got from all of this, that I guess the root causes of the themes we'll talk about, has been trying to follow themes of health and themes of justice and themes of cultural revitalization through the foods. And so I by following the foods, it brought me to the doorstep of decolonization. It brought me to the threshold of indigeneity. By following foods, it brought me to historical trauma and the true history of the United States. By following foods, I would encounter cultural genocide and ethnogenocide of people, land, and waters across the entire planet. So food has been very powerful. And just growing up on the res and doing what I do and being lucky to work in some really great kitchens, encountering racism, prejudice, injustice, and in my own journey, it includes substance abuse and addiction. So I'm in recovery, 11 years clean, and so a lot of what I talk about is lived experience, and I'm still in this pursuit of understanding. I'm still very much at the beginning. So, but I've kind of come full circle. I'm back in the town where I was born, cooking with White Mountain Apaches. We got Apache chefs. I think where I humbly and with enthusiasm say that we're probably first generation Apache trained Apache chefs. So it's pretty cool. That's kind of us in a nutshell.
That's impressive. I mean, and inspirational. You congratulations, first of all, on your 11 years of sobriety, and also on hitting that benchmark that you just shared right now of first generation Apache trained Apache chefs. Um, that is really a shift in kind of the pattern of culinary training, I think, and education. How food is taught. Would like to be able to touch on that a little bit later. What that training has looked like for your staff and for yourself. But before we move to that direction, I would like to ask or get into a little bit about what you think some of the structural or historical roots of modern culinary culture are. We've previously discussed the Financial Times article, Fine Dining Faces Its Truths, Its Dark Truths in Copenhagen. Copenhagen being the culinary hub of, of you know, the best of the best culinary trends, and um, Mecca has been named a Mecca in the culinary world for up and coming cooks and chefs. Yet this article has brought to light what many of us have been already have lived through and experienced here in the U.S. and in other parts of the world. Um, and so, what I guess what are some of those? What are some of the practices? You mentioned, you touched on a little bit of it: the racism, the injustices, harassment. Um, where does this come from? Would you say, if we can point to a starting point, how did this become normalized? Because for us, it was just something that we just kind of went through and put your head down. We chef, yes chef, keep going. Blinders on. But what would you say is the root of this sort of dynamic, um, and how the industry has just been tolerating it for all these years?
Uh, I think any young person that gets into cooking is naturally has an interest in the history of food and cooking. I know certainly for myself, when I was in culinary school, I wanted to really understand the history of this field that I was getting into. And in 1998, when I was in a culinary program, I like to say that I'm classically trained. I'm proud of having a lot of French classical roots in my background. Um, and so I think that interest in understanding the language, the kitchen language around the world as being fundamentally and classically French, that's important. And also, aside from all of the prestige and long legacy and history associated with the classical brigade system and the classical training, I think we also have to understand the cultural violence that has come with classical training. And I think, as as some of us know in our careers, when we study people like Escoffier, Ferdinand Point, the classical French family tree of chefs and how they've extended across the globe, I think one thing that we talk about lightly in some situations is the culture of violence, but we rarely kind of get too deep into it. Um, I think when we read that article that you were talking about, Chef Chris, it does bring to light what we've lived with all our careers. I do think that when we try to understand and shape and mold our own kitchens, we can make an impact on the next few generations. I think for a long time, especially when I was a younger cook, everybody that I worked for or worked with would always say, you need to go to France to get some training. You need to stage in Germany. You need to go to Lyon. You need to go visit the classical masters. And so that created an air of mystique and mystery around it. And so, as America has matured in a culinary sense, we've that's no longer true. We no longer need to travel to France and Europe to get classical training. We've grown as a country in America, and I think with that evolution of our gastronomic legacy, we have the ability to make some changes. And across the board, I think especially during and as we've been managing COVID, it's really brought to light so many cultural phenomenon that need to change, from Black Lives Matter to themes of police brutality to land back movements to a number of different themes that um, are related to our mental health and our public health. And we're not isolated from that. Younger chefs are understanding that they have a right to speak on these themes of violence and um, mistreatment. It is definitely time to speak up and change some of these themes. So I think when we look at this history, a lot of it does come from necessity, and it does cause us to ask the question: is it necessary to go to that length? Is it necessary to have a team of 45, 50 people to produce 30 to do 30 covers a night with a tasting menu? So there's a lot of different, I guess, tentacles to this monster, you could say. But I definitely think it's kind of rooted in imperialism. It's rooted in colonialism, and it's rooted in American sensationalism across the board. Because as America wants to mature as a country, they want to mimic sophisticated cultures and powerful cultures around the world as they're growing into their own. And so I think it's no different in cuisine. So there's a number of things, a number of different directions we could go with that question, but that's what comes to mind.
Right. And would you say, in terms of the classical culinary schools, um, sort of now things have changed a lot. You've mentioned Black Lives Matter, land back movements, and so these different themes that are actually seeping into um, kitchen culture and dialogue, and kind of what's being talked about behind the line, in the prep kitchens, these amongst chefs. We're kind of breaking out of these boxes that we've been put into. When we were talking earlier in the week, you mentioned, it's like, we're cooking in a bento box, or we're learning. We've been trained in, compartmentalized. And actually, our previous guest, our previous pull up a chair, Professor Enrique Ochoa, also talks about in education how everything really in life, in the society, we're compartmentalized, we're all separated, and so we see also in this conversation and in our experience, being more holistic in our profession, in our cooking. And so, um, culinary education plays a big role in this, also, like bringing in these important themes, which is, the foundation of this series, Pull Up a Chair, is to be able to talk about these different topics. I think that the the culinary structure is no different. It's been taught like this is the way, it's the only way, but now we're seeing, a shift away from that. um, how, in your experience, what are some tools that you've been using to break away from this, the norm, the status quo of the modern kitchen brigade, and kitchen practices in your own kitchen at Cafe Gojo? And also, congratulations on Gather Films James Beard Award, which features your cafe, the restaurant where you're sitting in right now. How are you, and your team, um, putting into practice different ways of cooking and operating?
Uh, I think one of the first questions I heard was, or one of the themes that came is like how social justice issues are entering kitchen dialogue. I think it's very important, especially in North America and the United States, for chefs and operators and decision makers to understand that the demographics of our population are changing. In the American Southwest, minorities or BIPOC community, we're going to be the majority by 2030. Across the United States, we're going to be the majority by 2050. And this is going to cause a change, and we're feeling it right now, not just because of COVID, but because in light of health needs, dietary needs, educational needs. As the population continues to change and people begin to realize that the structures we've been living under are damaging and hurtful, it's going to have to enter into kitchens. We deal with the one of the fundamental human rights of life is food and water. And so naturally, we do have to have these conversations and talk about and address public health because I think it's like the late Anthony Bourdain would say, he knows and understands full well that the backbone of his kitchen was not a bunch of non-native guys hanging out in the kitchen. It was Ecuadorians, Peruvians, Salvadorians, um, people from Mexico, people from the BIPOC community. And so I don't think that's going to change. And so these questions definitely we need to continue to ask them. Um, I'm fortunate in my path that I decided to get clean and put away the drugs and the alcohol and the culture of debauchery that kind of pervades our industry. It's still there, just not really a part of it as so much. I still love and appreciate the kitchen dynamics and the structure and the discipline of everything that we do. Um, because of my own journey with sobriety and entering into that, my style of cooking and myself as an individual, I've evolved into a clinician. The place where I'm at Cafe Gaujon is where we deal with drugs and alcohol treatment. So I've kind of had to understand and study in order to save my own life from addiction and dependency, but also to communicate how vocational training is a part of an individual support system when they're in recovery. And I want to stress that recovery is not just about drugs and alcohol. That is the last element of somebody's issue. There's recovery from incarceration. There's recovery from diabetes. There's recovery from a health disorder. There's recovery from a number of different things, including loss. I think we all know in our journeys as chefs the young, talented men and women that burned out before their time. I think we overlooked their emotional and mental struggles as being weak, as not being able to hang. Um, we could recognize their pain and struggle, but because the majority of our kitchen culture would shun that, we just stood back and watched them meet their demise or change fields. And I definitely think that needs to change. I can, as I talk about this, I can think of a couple handfuls of chefs and cooks in my personal life that are no longer cooking, and some that have passed on. And so I think it is a critical issue because we are a human driven operation in all of our restaurants and organizations. And we really need to take care of ourselves so we can take care of others. And the culture of violence and shaming and racism really needs to be changed.
Thank you for mentioning the some that tendency to kind of dismiss and overlook the challenges, the personal challenges that professionals or workers face that we have kind of forced to push aside and get through the day or show up to work. Working while sick. Um, you mentioned also in our previous conversations about Bourdain's quote, "Grandma died, bury her on your day off," type of mentality, right? And so there's quite a long list of challenges that get in the way of making these shifts in our culture. So, um, since you're actually bridging one of the major ones, and that's mental health and recovery, um, what other challenges do you see more broadly outside of outside of what you're doing, that perhaps other chefs or organizations, restaurants should start to look at, to help encourage more of a work-life balance, um, self-care, an environment that will promote our profession or our careers with longevity and health. Um, what other examples could you share or provide, um, Chef Nephi?
Um, I think it's a very difficult one because those of us that are, old dogs and the older dogs, we're going to be real hesitant to change some of this because of our egos. And I think if we continue to bring young chefs into our kitchen and train them in the way we were trained, the way we were shamed into discipline, the way we were shamed into organization, the way we worked under threatening pressure, the legacy is just going to continue. So I think both young professionals entering the field should speak up more on how to create this. I think it's going to be a long journey forward in terms of changing some of these structures. I think finding the right organization to work for is important to be able to be in an environment that gets it. Because remember, some of us as chefs, this is all we've ever done in our lives. We've never really seen ourselves doing anything else. We may not have even known there were other options. I entered professional kitchens in 1998, and I felt like for the past I think maybe 20 something years, I felt like kind of like a racehorse with my blinders on, just constantly working towards developing my skills and never really taking the time to understand that there were other branches in this food sovereignty or public health tree that we are in. Never really understood that I didn't have to cook for a living. But I think the sense of desperation that comes with doing our jobs well sometimes propels us to continue to work harder and harder and harder. So I think when we're able to take a moment and understand that we do have options as professionals, that's really important. That mental health is an important part of what we do. I think so much of the culinary industry, as being one of the many fields that's male dominated, is definitely impacted by the sense of machismo or toxic masculinity that enters it. Very much like a construction field where you got to keep up, make or break attitudes. I think because we are such a, like, again, a human driven industry, we definitely should start taking a better look or a closer look at the mental and emotional health of our staff, especially now because we're struggling to get staff in kitchens more and more so. I think during the pandemic, a lot of people woke up and realized that they have options, that their skills they learned in the kitchen can be applied to other professions, and some people have not returned. So now, who is left in the field and that will be entering our field, it's an opportune time to begin the small changes, and those changes begin with us as practitioners that are mentors and that are students. So that's kind of, I hope that answers your question, Chef.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's good worth mentioning one of the articles that we included in the event document for our audience to take a look at is a letter to stagiaires that you sent over to me, which goes deeper into what you're kind of leading us towards, is self advocation, self advocating for young professionals entering the field. Like now that we are in this shortage, and there is this this broader awareness of what it means to be an essential worker. What this pandemic has kind of lifted the veil on the value that essential workers have in the global economy, and so that gives us something to also pass on to um, the newer generation of cooks entering the field, that they have uh, agency to advocate for the experience of what they deserve, as stagiaires going into a work environment. So I know that you have experience in being a stagiaire, and also um, setting up stages for as an advocate, as a mentor for other cooks. So, would you mind touching on that particular example a little bit of what that would look like, or just if you could comment on that article, that letter?
I really appreciated that piece that I got. It was in the New Worlder. Nicholas Gill is the one who writes for that, and that um, that online magazine. But being a stagiaire and just being an individual, I guess it's really just assessing your rights. I think we just kind of blindly accept these long-term stagiaire programs to where we're unpaid. Both of these articles that we're kind of referencing now talk about the hours and hours of just picking herbs or doing something very mundane, and these organizations getting free labor out of it, basically, and it's just something, a couple of words to put on your resume. I think those instances are very unfortunate and they should not happen. But it's hard to say where you will be placed when you're a stagiaire. I do think being a stagiaire or doing a stage is vitally important, not only because it helps you to see what's possible, but it's a form of culinary education that is multisensory, and you really need to be able to see what other cooks and chefs are doing in their kitchens. And when you do have the opportunity to stage, and when I have the opportunity to stage, see, I'm 42 years old, and I want to stage, and I have a list of places I want to go and return because I'm not done learning. I'm still a student, and when you do go to stage, or when I go to stage, I'm not just looking at the food. I'm not just looking at flavors. I'm listening when I'm staging. What are the cooks talking about? What is the chefs talking about? What is the energy in the kitchen like? What does the walk-in look like? Are the floors clean? Are the floor drains clean? How clean is the hood? What's the attitude and the demeanor of people that are working with me? Do they see me as being a valuable person while I'm there for a small period of time? Or am I just there as a workhorse to get things done? Are they feeding me? Are they, allowing me to take a break? Do I get a negative attitude if I ask to take a phone call or to take a break? You know what I mean? Those are all very important elements of a stage. And I think us as cooks, we're hypersensitive naturally because we deal with so many dynamics. But I definitely think um, taking a look at this tradition of stagiaires, and being critical of where you select to go if you're going to do it. I think it's very valuable because we get to see how other operators are doing things, and we get to pick and choose what we want to take and leave behind when we leave those places. So I hope that answers your question, Chuck.
Definitely, definitely does. Thank you. Well, I think it's a good time to shift to some of the questions in our chat coming through. Um, some of them you've already responded to, so I'll skip over those. But I think I would like to first read off a comment to reinforce what I've been hearing a lot lately, working in different kitchens. I, as you know, I work across different kitchens um, throughout LA, and I run into people that I worked with for 15, 20 years ago. It's really amazing. It's such a small world, but what I'm hearing a lot lately sounds a lot like what uh, Joe here in our comments shared. And Joe says, "It took me 9 years to shed the instilled culture of work, work, work at all costs. I now living my life and in a much better place physically, mentally, and spiritually. I am enjoying life. I am so happy to see the industry start to change in a positive way. So I think it might be safe to assume that maybe perhaps it was the pandemic that created a shift, kind of makes us, has forced us to sit down and um, look at our work life balance. And I think this is something that a lot of people, not just in our profession, but in many other professions, are realizing. And so I just wanted to echo Joe, and thank you for that comment. And also, I would like to. Somebody's asking, what state is your restaurant? Um, if you want to respond to Patricia, who's asking where your restaurant is located.
Yeah, okay. Um, I'm coming to you from the White Mountain Apache tribe in northeastern Arizona. We operate a small cafe called Cafe Gaujon, and Gaujon is an Apache word that means balance, love, laughter, harmony, joy, all kinds of different things, and a lot of different uses. Cafe Gaujon is a small 32-seat cafe. We do Western Apache cooking and cuisine, and we try to expand food vocabulary in our community. We are on the White Mountain Apache Reservation and about 3.5 hours northeast of Phoenix. So we're way out there. I kind of uh, I kind of think about those old school French books that would say if you want to get regional classical French cooking, you have to go out to the countryside in Lyon or north of France, south of France. Kind of feel like we're, in a way, making that happen too. If you want to get some real Apache style foods and see a real Apache team, you gotta, you know, get 3.5, 4 hours away from the city and way out in the boonies and the mountains on the res. So that's where we're at.
Thank you, Chef. So I'm reading here. One on culinary education from Annette, who shares culinary education also has a role. We can change the current culture by educating chefs on what is not acceptable. In our culinary program at TU Dublin, we teach this in the Mindful Kitchen compulsory module for all first year students. And Annette dropped a link, YouTube on the module in the comments. Um, Thank you, Annette. And Char says, in Philly, there is a vegan restaurant that serves zero proof. All all team members must be working an active recovery program in order to be employed. The restaurant was born out of the isolation of COVID, and it is called Voisted. Sorry, Volstead. Volstead. Thank you, Char, for sharing that. Barbara shares, I suffer from mental health. My question is, how do you maneuver through the distractions to get what you need done? I have 2 certificates in guest services and 2 in food. Sorry, moved around a little bit. That haven't been used yet due to too many distractions. Plus, my sobriety is an issue. Is there anything that you could respond to Barbara on that?
Uh, I, this kind of makes me think of one of Chef Chris's questions, and when the analogy we used about a bento box.
Mm-hmm.
We When we first got into cooking years ago, everything was compartmentalized. It was like you're going to be a chef. It's fine dining, hotels, industry wide, these kind of different things. But no one really shared with us that there's a realm of different applications for foods. Food is science, food is language, food is health, food is culture, food is history, food is mental health. So there's a lot of different ways that I think those certificates you have could be applicable. It's just I think if you're working in a restaurant right now, it might be too fast paced to acknowledge some of them. But maybe think of considering If you got the lived experience of sobriety and dealing with managing mental health, those are very, very valuable assets. There's in recovery circles and therapeutic circles, we always say experience is the best teacher, and trust your struggle. So I think take a look around and see what possibilities. I mean, in light of what your goals might be, if you want to stay, fine dining focused, or you want to continue on the path you're on, sometimes our paths change, and we don't know when they're going to change. Sometimes we make those decisions, or sometimes life makes those decisions for us. But I personally think you have really valuable um, assets there with your certificates and your lived experience. I think maybe find an environment that will be conducive to utilizing those things, and don't worry about the stigma that might come with mental health. Because when you get into an environment with a mental health organization or agency, say a treatment center, a behavioral health a center, any place that values recovery and intellectual and personal health, those assets will be recognized, and you'll probably have to get really creative. Stretch your writing muscles and articulate how food and your lived experience can create something powerful with those certificates you have and your experience to date. That's what I think of when you ask those questions.
Oh, very valuable response and direction that you provided to Barbara. Thank you, and anybody else who might see themselves in that similar situation. Thank you, Chef. One more question here, and then after this, if you'd like to, after your response, if you can respond to this, feel free to just mention any last remarks or comments, and we can bring it to a wrap. Because I know you got to get going. Um, Thank you again for your time and all of your valuable gems that you're providing here with us today. So, Tamara asks, are children on the reservation educated with respect to social injustice, culture, and food? If so, what does that instruction look like? I think this is a great question because it's an intergenerational question, right? We can't forget about the youth and how we're bringing in um, the future of our people, of those who are also affected by uh, our work environment and just this what we're talking about today. So if you could respond to that.
Yeah, thank you for that question. Um, I think um, growing up on the res is very difficult. I think themes of injustice and oppression are magnified, and to us, it feels normal. It's not until you step outside of the environment and you have access to education, or you have access to care, you have access to peace, that you realize how tough it is coming from a marginalized group like the BIPOC community. And I think this really makes me think of stressing today as we wrap up that chefs and practitioners really take a look, a deep dive from an indigenous um, point of view, the theme of historical trauma. Because America as a culture, as a world power, was founded on a culture of violence. And when we opened up and we are talking about that, it's not just because we're nitpicking, we got a bone to pick or an axe to grind. Yeah, those might be true, but the true historical fact of how we've evolved as a country in North America and how kitchens have evolved globally, it does include these themes. If as chefs, if we're truly going to understand how we can make an impact in public health, in epidemiology, in nutrition, and in cultural revitalization, we really have to be sensitive to these themes of recovery. Because if we're going to continue to shift our kitchens and meet people where they're at, that's one of my favorite themes, is because not all people have the opportunity to have these discussions. Some of us are so busy living under oppression, living in poverty. Some of us are so busy just surviving, living paycheck to paycheck, that we don't have the time or the luxury to have intellectual conversations. We don't have the time or the ability to sit and talk about food security or where we are in the food chain or the supply chain. We're just kind of living in survival mode. So I think when you take a real strong look at cuisines of the world, you're going to see indigenous cultivars as a foundational part of that, not just in the United States. For me, as an indigenous Native American chef, I always tell people that the foundational terroir of all contemporary American cooking is Native American cuisine, is indigenous landscapes. So you can't continue to misappropriate or continue this, keep feeding this monster that is colonialism and pretending that these histories are not there. These histories are the reasons we're having these conversations now. These histories are the reason we see Black Lives Matter. We're talking about police brutality, talking about cultures of violence, talking about public health. It's because the truth is coming to light. And so I want to stress that those themes are true. These when you're in these conversations and it feels uncomfortable, really take a moment to ask yourself, why am I feeling uncomfortable? When we talk about themes of public health, racism, discrimination, prejudice, um, toxic masculinity, if we're feeling very uncomfortable with it, it's because we're not wanting to address it. We refuse to change. We might be complacent to cultures of violence. So it's a deep dive. If we're gonna take the first step as individual practitioners, whether we're 18 years old just starting out in school, or we're in our 40s, 50s, or 60s and we've been doing this all our lives. It is never too late to enter into recovery. And there is one tool that comes to mind that you could probably take a look at as a practitioner. There's a study that was done years ago, and it's called the ACE study, or it's ACEs, Adverse Childhood Experiences. And this study was done over the course of like almost 30 years, and it kind of looked at the upbringing of a wide range of young people from 1 years old all the way to 18 years old. And this is a tool, a predictor in mental health for health disparities like smoking, addiction, incarceration, cancer, diabetes, obesity, heart disease. Um, so you can go online, and there's a multitude of resources to learn about ACEs, and you can know your ACE score. And it's a very useful tool. None of this is to blame anyone. It's just to put the facts on the table and sort it out like your mise en place, so you can move forward. It's kind of like, for me, it's been a great tool to work out my mental emotional mise en place. Um, so in having these conversations, take a look and expand the paradigm. Include themes of justice and reclamation, and it's a worthwhile journey. I'm very much very proud to be a chef. I love this. I've gotten into it. I still honor and respect some of the core themes of my early training as a young chef. Um, but I'm excited to be a part of this generation that is making some changes emotionally, intellectually, with the next 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years in mind. So that's kind of what I have to say. Uh, oh, and one other thing, if some of the themes that Chef Chris and I are talking about today are interesting, and you want to take a deeper look at some of the themes of historical trauma, go and watch the film Gather. It won a James Beard Award. It's on Netflix. We had no idea it would reach that far, but it's a very human story, and it's a microcosm. Those of us that are in that film, there's this struggle is global. Indigenous communities, communities of poverty, marginalized groups, we're all in this same struggle to situate ourselves and our perspectives in a larger narrative of cuisine and cooking, because food is life. So that's what I have to say.
Chef Nephi, thank you so much for your time coming to us from Cafe Gojo on the beautiful White Mountain Apache Tribe and Reservation. Say hello to everyone out there for us. Awesome, man. Thank you so much for being here today. And yes, that is a great note to end on. I definitely encourage you all to watch Gather. And if you really want to taste what we've been talking about today, um, take a trip down to or up, depending where you're at, across to Cafe Gojo, um, and yeah, see for yourself how these different kitchens are creating new ways of cooking, new ways of managing, and new ways of training. And that'll do it for us for today. I want to thank again all of the Ruby staff and team putting together Pull Up a Chair. Stay tuned to our next series. Follow us on Instagram, and you can subscribe to the YouTube channel also. On the events page for our live events, you can see all of our different live events that we have uh, at Ruby Online Culinary School, and especially the ones that this series has coming up for Pull Up a Chair. Again, thank you very much. I'm Chris Rodriguez. I look forward to seeing you all again soon. Thanks again, Chef.